Last week at E3, we found out from Junichi Masuda that only Pokemon that are in the Galar Pokédex will be allowed to be sent from Pokemon Home to Sword and Shield. And there was a lot of confusion, a lot of misinterpretation, even some misinformation about what that means. And there's still a lot we don't know. It's still a developing story. Every couple of days we've gotten a little bit here, a little bit there from interviews. But this news has been very divisive. We've had reactions all the way from this is the worst thing that could have happened, Sword and Shield is ruined, it's now a trash game, all the way to it's no big deal. Personally, I'm in that later camp. And I don't want to go too much into it. I feel like other people like Callum, Toby, Hoops, they've already said everything and I basically agree with everything that they said. But I understand that it's a bummer, especially if your favorite Pokemon ends up not being included, and also especially for those of you who focus more on the competitive part of the post-game, but it won't affect the way I play. In my first playthrough of a new game, I usually try to focus on new Pokemon only, and even once I reach the post-game or when I'm doing my second or third playthrough or whatever, I'm usually trying new things. I'm not always trying to find ways to use Umbreon. And the thing is that I think this is actually an understandable choice. The number of Pokemon was starting to become unmanageable. It's probably why Generation 6 and 7 were smaller. Not because they were afraid of hitting the 1,000 mark, but because they were more afraid of the accumulation of work that they were making for themselves with this commitment to always add new Pokemon and always include every existing Pokemon in all the future games forever. This wasn't sustainable. So I think that limiting the number of Pokemon that are in the game means they can probably spend more time to make more new Pokemon and give us a bigger generation like we've been wanting, like we've been asking for, and we still get a large, diverse region with probably multiple hundreds of Pokemon. And I think it's important to keep in mind that we are not losing our old Pokemon because we will still have them in Home. You know, I always want to keep bringing my Blaziken, my team from Pokemon Ruby that I've had for so many generations, and I've had them in every game, and it kind of sucks that I won't be able to put them in Sword and Shield, but I will still have them. And I think Home will probably be more than just storage. It's not just a bank, a place for you to put things away in, but it's a home, a place for your Pokemon to live in. And I was given hope that this is correct when Masuda said in the Famitsu interview that Pokemon will have an active role in Pokemon Home. Now, I haven't seen a full translation of the interview, but this is what Cerebi was reporting on, which I trust, even though we don't know at this point what that active role might be. Now, we also know from Masuda that there has not been a decision yet about whether or not to add those missing Pokemon to Sword and Shield later through patches or DLC or something. But I don't think that that's likely because of the way this announcement was made, that Masuda was talking about it as a change in philosophy at Game Freak. Of course, the backlash might make them change their minds, but I think the decision actually makes sense, and that we can consider this the death of the National Pokédex. Now, I know that Generation 7 already didn't have a National Pokédex. You could bring in every Pokemon from previous games into Sun and Moon, but the Pokédex itself was essentially turned into a feature of Pokemon Bank. But to me, this change, this announcement, signals that this is essentially the way of the future, that we should not expect any future games to have a complete set of Pokemon. I expect future games to have 400 to 500 Pokemon each with a unique roster every time where there's some overlap, but also a lot of Pokemon that are included in some games but not others. Now, this does bring up an interesting question. I saw someone mention this on Twitter, I don't remember who it was, but basically the question is, if Sword and Shield and whatever is the next set of Gen 8 games, whether that's Diamond and Pearl remakes or whatever, if they have different sets of Pokemon programmed into them, does that make them incompatible? Does that mean that you can't trade or battle between games of the same generation? And this question actually made me think of Pokemon Stadium, of all things, specifically Pokemon Stadium 2. Now, I know this probably feels like a bit of a weird jump, but stick with me, it's gonna make sense. I hope. We haven't seen a new Pokemon Stadium game since Generation 2. Pokemon Battle Revolution was kind of similar, but it also didn't have all the same features. And as much as I love Pokemon Stadium, it's been years since I've had any expectation that this series might make a comeback. And that's because many of the beloved features of Pokémon Stadium are already implemented in other ways. The Game Boy Tower, for example, which allowed you to play your Pokémon games on the TV. Well, that's the whole point of the Switch. Being able to have your battles in glorious 3D, well, that's been standard since X and Y. The Gym Leader Castle essentially allowed you to have Gym Leader rematches, which are now also almost standard. They've been in almost every game since Pokemon Emerald. And Oak's Lab, which gave you access to a Pokédex, some additional Pokemon storage, and even allowed you to manage boxes across multiple games at the same time. That's basically the role of Pokemon Bank, and probably also of Pokemon Home. Now, there are some features from Pokemon Stadium that we haven't seen and that could still make a comeback. There was Earl's Pokemon Academy in Stadium 2, which was sort of a tutorial for basic competitive strategies. Probably not a lot of people's favorite feature, but I actually enjoyed it myself. There were minigame tournaments. Main series of games have had minigames in them, but they were either single player or at least not in tournament format like we had in Stadium 2, and that's something that I could see being in Pokemon Home. And these Stadium Cups actually had a few things that I missed from the competitive parts of the post-game. There were different and complex rule sets going all the way from Little Cup, which was freshly hatched Pokemon, all the way to Prime Cup, which was sort of anything goes. You also had the ability to create teams that combined the Pokemon that you raised yourself in your games with some stock rented Pokemon, so you didn't have to build the entire team yourself or even rely on entirely rented Pokemon like at the Battle Agency. I also thought the Stadium Cups were a good medium difficulty. They were much harder than the main games themselves, but they were also not as hard as battling against real people online, or even something like the Battle Tree. Because in the Stadium Cups, you would battle the same characters with the same teams every time. Now, their pick of 3 Pokemon for the individual battle might change, but you can still build teams for specific challenges rather than for just anything that might come up, so I think that's a happy medium in terms of difficulty. Why did I go on this Pokemon Stadium tangent again? Oh, right. Pokemon Stadium 2 actually allowed for battles between teams of Pokemon from Generation 1 and Generation 2. Generations 1 and 2 had that overlapping but different roster of Pokemon available. You could trade between them with the time capsule, but you couldn't battle them directly. But in Pokemon Stadium, that didn't matter. Your Pokemon could still be bred, caught, raised, even kept in your main series games, but because the battles were not happening in the main series games, they were happening in Stadium, the compatibility wasn't a problem. It didn't matter that Pokemon Yellow had no idea what a Murkrow was. So if there is a Generation 8 version of Pokemon Stadium, it could make any future games compatible. It doesn't even need to be developed by Game Freak. Stadium 2 was developed by HAL Laboratories, Pokemon Battle Revolution was developed by Genius Sonority, but do I really think this is going to happen? Well, I want it, and I think it would solve at least some of the problems with limiting the number of Pokemon, and it seems possible. It's the kind of thing that I could see them doing, but I don't know if I would go so far as to say that it's likely. I expect there to be something, to be some sort of solution to this possible compatibility issue, even if it's not this approach exactly. So is this limit to the number of Pokemon in the game a problem for the way you play? Would a Pokemon Stadium-like game help solve at least some of those problems? I want to hear more. Just make sure that you're respectful. I have seen some of the stuff going around on Twitter and Reddit about this, and it's not all pretty. I don't want that. But if you enjoyed this video, you can leave a like and share it with your friends. If you're new here, you can subscribe. And if you want to support my work in other ways, you can check out my Patreon and my merch store. The links are in the description. I'm Umbreon Libris, and I'll see you in the next chapter.